I think when you think of Mopar, you think of the biggest, fattest elephant motor you can think of. So that we've gone with the big 572 Hemi. It's just massive. So they're a monster of an engine. So we actually spoke to Mopar shop in America, and Stanton Race Engines built the engine for us. And one thing we also noticed in America, that they love stick shift. So we thought, all right, we've never really built a stick shift car for one of our own cars, because I prefer automatic cars. So we went with the Tremac 256, and they organised to get that built for us as well. So the whole engine package came from Mopar shop, from Mopar themselves, and it was built by their race division that does their NASCAR stuff. So the engine was engine dynoed by Stanton Race Engines in America, and it was about 840. It would have put out at the flywheel. That would have been where they measured it from. And the engine was built to Jake's performance specs, so he actually told them what valve springs he wanted, what rod bolts, all that sort of stuff, what compression he wanted to run, because we were running the F3 Pro Charger. So the F3R, I mean, they're good for 2,500 horsepower. So we could potentially set this motor up at a couple of thousand horsepower if we wanted to, not a problem. It would be quite comfortable just to set it up at about 1,200 and see what it's like from there. The engine placement is pretty critical. It decides a lot of things, as people would know. It decides how your car's going to handle. If you put your engine too far forward, you're in trouble. So we did set this motor back a fair bit, which has obviously helped in where the main weight is. Most of the weight's still over the middle of the cross member, which is where it should be. But we've also got this massive crank-driven bracket on the front, which is a reverse rotation supercharger bracket that's been custom made by the supercharger store in US. It's massive in itself. It's probably 8 inches from front to back. And then you've got this big F3R Pro Charger on the front of it. So the motor itself is just massive this way, massive this way. And yeah, it was a lot of work to try and get that. It actually literally comes to within 2 inches of the front bar, the intake system. So big job to try and get that motor placement right cosmetically, but also engineering-wise, it had to be in the right spot too for weight. So the EFI decision was Jake's decision. That was kind of, I always trust and leave that decision up to Jake from Jake's Performance. He's been our engine builder for 20 years. So last time with the Nova we went carbureted, this time we went EFI. So he's gone with a 2000cc injector in each hole, and we're running a Link computer system. I've always been a bit of a supercharger man, you know, going back from the Roots type blower. Centrifugal superchargers, I just like how instant they deliver the power. There's no spooling up like a turbo. You just put your foot down and the thing goes. Crank-driven Pro Charger, we went this time because we had the belt-driven one last time, and we wanted to make sure we did something a bit different again. Probably the smallest area of the motor that took the longest time was the water pump. We've used Wiggins clamps on and solid radiator hoses, so they're all solid alloy tubes. There's no rubber hoses on this car anywhere. So to do that, you have to weld a fitting on, and in the water pump, because there's 2 radiators, it needs 2 outlets. So it's an alloy water pump that we've welded 2 outlets on the top of, and then we've completely smoothed it off and then got it all ready to paint. Then with our injectors, because everyone knows fuel injection's got a lot of wiring, a lot of ugly looking plugs, and there's things hanging off it everywhere. So we've just made a nice cover that tied into our intake manifold and to our valve covers to hide that, and everyone knows spark plug leads are usually the next thing that's quite hard. On the top of the valve covers, you know, Hemi always have spark plugs going straight down the guts of the valve covers, so the covers that you see on the rocker covers themselves are all custom built, and they were sort of made into a little bit of a work of art too. So they've got little vented areas that you can still see what's in there, but they've also got the logo of the car in there. They bolt straight onto the top of the factory valve cover, but they hide the spark plug wires so you can kind of get rid of some of the ugliness. Yeah, well, on the front of the heads, we all know that most V8s are offset heads and most of them are not symmetrical. So one thing I did forget about was the symmetry side of things. So I got a bit excited and just made a cover for one side, and then I just mirror imaged it to the other side with the same bolt holes, expecting the bolts to be in the same spot on the head. And yeah, well, they weren't, were they? So we had to weld nuts onto the front of the head on the second head, so that we could actually have the bolts in the same spot as the other side. So that was just to hide a few things that we didn't really want to see on the front too, like your Welsh plugs and a few other things that you can't get away from. So they're the Pro Charger race valves, and with that size Pro Charger you need 2 of them. So they work kind of opposite the turbo. They're open all the time until you put your foot down and they close. So they're basically letting all the unused air of the supercharger out of the system. Down to, we ceramic coated our exhaust system in a nice black, and it looked awesome. Yeah, so we heat wrap the exhaust. It might not be the prettiest look, but it's there for a reason. It's there to serve a purpose. It handles a certain amount of heat and it holds it in, and that's why we did it. So with this car, we didn't compromise anything in the build, because the end goal was to be able to drive it. And when we go to America, we drive them at a lot of the events over there and the autocross tracks, so it has to perform like a normal car. You have to be able to drive this thing on the road every day if you needed to. It was a pain in the ass actually making a car like something like this a manual, because yeah, you do. You've got the clutch pedal, you've got the lines, the reservoir, just everything about it. Yeah, that sort of horsepower with those big wheels, with that sort of clutch setup, it's been a bit of a challenge. But you know, we're lucky that Mopar helped us out with getting the box built and the bell housing. Mopar stuff's a bit tricky sometimes. So it's been a bit of a learning curve with the Mopar stuff, with the Tremec gearbox, but you know, we got there in the end. Yeah, the diff, we told them that it needs to handle around 2,000 horsepower. And once again, it's a roadster shop built diff. So to do that, we've obviously got a different centre in it, thicker, stronger axles as well. So we just left that design side up to the roadster shop. Pretty cool having an independent rear suspension, because you've got adjustable toe in, toe out as well on the rear, which you never, it's been weird having that sort of adjustment when I'm so used to installing 9 inches all the time. Considering that we went way back in the piece and just chopped everything out and everything was gone, we just had a blank canvas. So that's quite challenging when you've just got a blank canvas. And obviously the most important thing to do first is your seating position. So once you get your seats in the right spot and your steering wheel and your pedals and you know, obviously with the manual system, as we just touched on, that's going to create another problem, because we need to make sure our footwell is big enough to keep, you know, our feet changing over, and it's such a challenge. So the very first part of the interior we started on was the tunnel. Once the engine was installed and we had our pedal box in and we had our seating position, then we could work our tunnel system out. So before we could actually do the tunnel system, we had to build the extractors. So we built the extractors and the exhaust system through the inside of the car. And then what we had to do, we thought, all right, well, cool. So we're not having an interior in this car, we're not having carpet, so we can't use Dynamat to keep the heat out. We can't use carpet underlay, we can't use carpet, we can't use leather if we're doing a flat floor. What the hell are we going to do here to keep the heat out of normal panel steel? So what we did is we got the shape that you see on each side of the tunnel, but in between each layer in the whole tunnel system of the car is a layer of heat shielding. So you've got the first layer, heat shielding, and the second layer, and then so it's sandwiched in between. So we thought, well, that's probably going to be the best thing to use between the layers. But then once we got from the first hump to the second hump, because of the internal tail shaft coming through the car, that's where it all had to turn to 3mm steel. So everything around that gear stick that you see, the top section, is all 3mm thick. But the next big thing was the dashboard. So the dashboard was all hand built from steel, started from pieces of rod floating in the middle of nowhere and ended up being what you see today. But one of the big features we did want to do as well is this, I'd never seen it done before, was a steel internal roof lining. Having a full steel internal roof lining and an external roof turret, I wasn't sure what could happen when you go over bumps. Could things flex? Could things move? So what we did is we thought, all right, well, we'll throw 2 big massive leather patches in the roof. They're only welded every inch underneath the plate that holds up the leather. So what that did is that created a scenario where it could move if it needed to without being a solid fixture. So it's actually worked quite well. We've used the car, we've driven it, we tested it, and luckily we went in the right direction. But the internal steel roof lining was a big challenge, especially when you think about how that had to tie in with the flush mount windows. You get over building the actual internal roof itself, but then you got to come down the pillars. So then that had to tie into the wheel arches and you know, the tubs. And then from there it had to tie into the door trim tops, and the door trim tops had to be removable so that you could put windows in. So there was so much functionality. I was not going to lose the window function of the car just because of the look I wanted, which plenty of cars have done that over the years. So the windows in this car still work. They still go up and down. They're electric. They don't build electric motors for the back, so we had to build them. Because the wheel tubs are so big, we're going to hit the factory glass windows, so we had to get ones made out of Lexan, but we wanted the curve of the factory windows, so we actually got them built out of Lexan, built with the factory curve to the factory spec and shape, but with the cutout where it goes down so the window can still go down and not hit the tub. So it's just, like I said before, a big ripple effect. The swage lines and a lot of the holes that you see, the dimple dyes and all that sort of stuff, they're not just there for looks, they're there for a reason. They're there for strength, they're there for things not to warp, not to move. They're there for structure, but they all, when you do it right, you can artistically make them look pretty cool as well. So I thought with the interior being a majority of it still had to have some soft touches, which in my eyes were some leather. So the floor itself, done the brown leather. The brown leather, I got told by so many people wouldn't work, but I knew what brown leather I wanted. I knew what was going to go well, and I knew what sort of diamond stitch I was going to put on it, and I was also knew that I was going to put heavy stitch on the outside, which they call a butterfly stitch, and it's in the orange, just to match the highlight colour on the outside of the car. And I think that, I mean, you know, everyone's got their own opinion, but I think that the colour of the leather, the amount of orange used in it and everything just ties the whole deal in together. We've got a trim shop in-house, so we know everything about interiors as well. And traditionally, yes, paint outside turns to leather inside or fabric, whatever you decide to use. Simple things around door frames called pinch weld. Well, there's no pinch weld in this car. It's still got the stainless steel roof moulds for the windows to have their rubbers in it. And that was a bit of a challenge to be able to put that in there with no pinch weld to hide the edging of it and all that sort of stuff. So there was a lot of areas that had to be thought about, really planned out well and executed properly so that you could make the inside and outside flow together, even down to the Havoc signs and the sills. I mean, so that piece is actually a piece of billet. It's machined out the back, the word Havoc's machined out of it. We've got an LED lighting system inside the bottom of it, and the wiring goes through the chassis of the car. So that's pretty cool. And then we thought, all right, cool, we'll introduce that between the rear seats. Recess them both in so they're all flush. And there are a couple ideas that sort of got created and it's branded the car with its name. Yeah, the iPad, I thought, look, you know what? How cool would it be to have a little iPad mini integrated in the dashboard? The airbag system you can control via an app. Nearly everything in these days we can control via an app. So the lighting system in the car you can control via an app. The stereo system in the car is all under the dashboard and it's all controlled by the app on the iPad. The airbags, like I said, are controlled by the app. And we are still thinking and seeing if we can make it start by a fingerprint on the iPad from an app, because I'm sure you can. We just got to try and work out how to do that. So the next build we do, I really want my two sons involved heavily on the build now. They're at an age and experience level where they can be involved, you know, professionally on it now. So we've been throwing around a few ideas. We're looking at 66 to 67 sort of model cars this time around, and you know, we've been looking at Novas, we've been looking at Chevelles, we've been looking at a lot of different cars of that era. That was sort of in the time when the bodies changed. You know, they were a totally different shape to what the ones in the 70s were. So
we're running along the lines maybe of a 66 Nova, because that's what I've liked, and I've just been feeding him ideas. So yeah, that'd be cool.
Goes to show he trusts us, and he's taught us well enough that he can trust us to be in his next project, and he wants our names to be associated with him. That's, you know, I can't think of anything bigger than that.
Probably the 66, 67 mark, probably a Chevy this time around we'll do again. But we don't know, we haven't put our finger on it yet.